33 minutes after the hour of 12 noon here, Central Time, where we are in the hinterland of the nation. It is Wednesday, and of course, Fred Dashevsky with U.S. Coin Capital. I keep talking about him every time I wave the Magic Franklin right up in front of the glass there so you can see it in the camera. I know it's kind of like I keep this one out, and I notice it's getting a little dingy on the surface. Yeah, it's getting tarnished on the surface here, and I'm like, uh-oh. I mean,
actually, it's a natural process for coins to tone, and it does not at all detract from their value.
Did you hear that, folks? So just because you got a little tarnish on it doesn't mean anything, right?
The worst thing to do would be to clean it or polish it to try to make it bright again, because that actually would destroy any numismatic value.
I was wondering about that because so many people, they go out and they buy that Tarnex because they see the commercial where you dip it in there and all of a sudden it's real shiny. And it's like, look, I got an MS whatever. No, you don't. It looks like you used Tarnex on it. Yeah.
The grading services themselves are very particular about what they call original coins. So if a coin has ever been deemed to be clean, polished, altered in any way, and it could have been 100 years ago, if somebody polished it, then it gets dirt on top of the polish, it has been changed from its original nature, and it will not be graded by any of the professional services. So never, ever clean or polish your coin, no matter what it looks like.
Wow. So you have to understand something. Fred's got over 40 years in the biz, folks. And this is one of the things. You don't become a member of the American Numismatic Association overnight. You got to know your stuff. As a matter of fact, Fred's got a $10 Liberty Head Mint 63, Mint State 63 gold piece now that you did a deal on.
Yeah, we bought a quantity of these that we are offering for $1,750. I think this is an excellent way for people to add gold. The $10 Indian was the $10 Liberty is the coin that preceded the Indian. So these are dated before 1907 and most likely will be just over the 20th century date. So they'll be early 1900, 1904, like that. But in mint condition, they really are a great way for people to add gold. The same coin becomes very expensive as you move up in grades, almost $4,000 in MS65. So at $1,750 for 63, it was a great opportunity. So we bought a quantity of those. And I also bought silver, just dimes, and we're offering 1,000 silver dimes, all pre-1964, $2,750 for 1,000 silver dimes.
So where are we at on spot price versus premium these days
almost,
now, Fred?
Yeah. Almost $31 silver right now for spot. The premiums have finally stabilized, but they remain incredibly low. We're in the lower range for where we've been, and I do think we finally have seen a solidification of those premium levels. So they haven't dropped at all in the past month or two, and they seem to be holding fairly steady at the current levels, which again, to me, they're remarkably low. The premiums at one point, a couple of years ago, were as high as $8 or $9 over spot, and we're literally down now to just 10 or 20 cents or 40 cents over.
Oh, that's not bad at all. Now, here's the thing, folks. You're dealing with somebody on this show right now that guests with us often, and there's a reason why we have Fred on, and it's not just because of U.S. Coin Capital. I mean, this is how Fred makes his living, obviously. But Fred has a background in a lot of different areas: psychology, poli-sci, economics. I have taken every single one of the classes that he did, and that and 50 cents will get me a cup of coffee. You have to have the kind of boots on the ground experience that Fred's got to make this thing worthwhile. I just know a fraction of what this guy knows, and some people say that would make me dangerous, but that's one of the reasons I have Fred on the show. Because
I'd like to know where you're getting that 50-cent cup of coffee.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah, we used to sell coffee for $1. Now look what people are paying at Starbucks. They called me crazy when I was selling badass coffee in my Caboose coffee shop for $1 with free refills, and now look at what they're paying for coffee. But see, this whole thing, a lot of it, and we're talking about the economy here, this has to do with, and we were talking about this, if you don't get Bill Brosius' letter, de-dollarization news. Fred gets it, I get it, and I'm looking at this stuff, scratching my head going, where is this country headed?
Well, what's the latest? Something really interesting happened just a couple weeks ago. So 50 years ago, in 1974, the United States arranged through Henry Kissinger a deal with Saudi Arabia that linked Saudi Arabia oil sales to dollars. So the deal was struck in 1974, and basically it said that the purchase of oil would be done in U.S. dollars from Saudi Arabia. So any sales of oil that Saudi Arabia did, they would conduct that sale in specifically U.S. dollars. Now, that meant that if you're a foreign country and you wanted to purchase oil from Saudi Arabia, you couldn't use your currency. You had to buy U.S. dollars first, and then you could use those U.S. dollars with Saudi Arabia. The second part of that deal was that Saudi Arabia would use portions of the revenue from the sale of oil and come back to the U.S. with those dollars to buy U.S. debt instruments, treasuries from the U.S. Department. So they supported the dollar in two fashions since 1974, and that was to, one, have everybody convert their money into U.S. dollars to buy oil first, and secondly, that profits from sales of oil around the world would come back to the U.S. in the form of Saudi Arabia buying U.S. government debt. Well, this agreement, which was struck for 50 years, expired in June, the first week of June 8th. They did not renew it.
Uh-oh.
So as of June 9th of this year, Saudi Arabia is no longer obligated under any agreement to have money converted into U.S. dollars first for purchases of oil, nor do they have to take proceeds from the sale of oil to continue to buy U.S. treasuries. This, to me, is a huge linchpin in what has kept the dollar strong over the past decades. And without this, I see this as one more thing moving us closer and closer away from the U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency.
That's some scary stuff. And it just happened. So, folks, you're getting, if you weren't appraised of this situation, you don't get Bill Brosius' newsletter. It's called De-Dollarization News. And, this is one of the reasons, we look at this stuff and analyze this stuff because, people need to understand about preservation of wealth. And when the dollar's value decreases, they just came out with another, Newsweek, I think, just did another study and asked me to evaluate it. They actually sent me a link and said, look, would you please read this article and tell us what you think? Is this a fair assessment of what's going on in real estate? And it said there's certain areas of the country right now, major markets, especially in Florida and other places in major markets where real estate values are dropping right now. And a lot of this has to do with the spending habits of the United States government. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely, because all of this will translate to where interest rates are. So the weaker the dollar gets, the higher interest rates will go, the more expensive it becomes to buy goods and services. So it's definitely going to have an impact on the real estate market, which is really predicated on how much the mortgage costs. So, we've said for years you could buy a $1 million house, but if the interest payments were low enough that your monthly payments were $1,000 a month, well, you could carry it for 1,000 years, and who cares? But as interest rates go up, it does make it much more difficult for the real estate market to continue to grow. So these things are very intertwined. And this is why everybody's paying such close attention to what the Fed will do and how soon they will do it. If you notice, here we are now, we're midsummer, we're right there, and we still haven't seen that rate drop where they said there were going to be 4 of them this year. We're kind of running out of time here. So, now we're pushing back to the pundits are all saying maybe September, there'll be the first one. Maybe it'll stretch out. There have actually been conversations about whether they might go the other way and raise rates before they start lowering them. But the reason I think this de-dollarization conversation is critical is because of what has supported the value of the U.S. dollar since the 1970s has been demand for it around the world. We know we don't have a gold or silver backed dollar anymore. We haven't since 1971. And the response from Saudi Arabia after the removal of the gold and silver standard was understandable. OPEC actually cut back on oil production. We had the oil crisis in 1973. We had the Yom Kippur War in 1973, where U.S. supported Israel. Saudi Arabia did not like either of these things, and the pushback caused oil prices to spike. So we arranged a deal with Saudi Arabia to make sure that the U.S. would always have a supply of oil. And that deal, again, was cut in 74. It forced them to use U.S. dollars, and this perpetuated demand. So what happens because of that is that if you're a foreign country, by default, you have to stockpile a quantity of U.S. dollars. You're going to have to conduct commerce, so you need them. So you stockpile them, and everybody else does. But if that demand for U.S. dollars wanes because it's not necessary, then it comes down to choice. Now I'm not holding the gun to your head anymore. I'm saying you're free to choose what you want. If you want to use another currency, you want to use yuan or yen or euros, you are now free to do that. So this is very detrimental to the future value of the U.S. dollar, because this support worldwide is becoming weaker and weaker. And again, it's like you're drawing a little graph out and you're looking at the dots on the lines, and they're starting to really line up. And if you sort of draw out the line where it's heading, it does not look good for the future purchasing power of the U.S. dollar. And that would mean interest rates going up. Again, that's where you're going to find trouble in the real estate market.
Well, not only that, Fred, but I mean, the cost of borrowing money now has gone up. And that this is a problem too, because I mean, there's zero down mortgages. What do you think? Oh, that's a repeat.
Here we go again.
Yeah, that's a repeat. I mean, they're really pushing this stuff hard and heavy because they want Americans in debt. Mike in Tennessee, do you have a question for Fred Dashevsky?
I actually have two questions, but I wanted to make a comment first, if I can.
Quickly.
Okay, in Memphis, Tennessee right now, there's an artificial inflation going on because these foreign nationals, Chinese interests and such, are coming in and buying up and paying 50% over retail. They're literally buying up these cheap houses. One house I knew of 4 years ago that sold for $44,000. They came in and paid $99,000 a few months ago for the same house. So they're investing the U.S. dollars that are, I should say, Federal Reserve notes that they want to get rid of. So they're acquiring assets in this country. The questions: does your company, or do you know of a way to do a gold-backed, self-held IRA where you take possession of the metals and you hold it, you're the custodian of it, and you convert your IRA into that which you hold? That's one question. The other thing is, who was that last guy that created U.S. dollars? What happened to him in 63?
John Kennedy.
Yeah, we know what happened to him.
I'm talking about U.S. notes. Yes, red seal notes. Okay, so to answer
that, Mike.
Your first question, IRAs right now are limited. If you want to take physical possession of gold within an IRA, it has to be a non-self-directed IRA. It cannot be self-directed unless they've changed, and I don't think they have. So as far as I understand, I don't believe anything has changed. The only way to own physical gold within some form of IRA program is one of these storage programs where you actually move your IRA to a storage facility that hosts the IRA, purchases gold for you, stores it physically for you, and gives you an accounting of what you have. And then whatever you sell, it gets attributed to your account. But you can't take physical possession of it within an IRA program. The second part of what you're talking about, so in 1963, when John Kennedy was looking to finance things like the Peace Corps and even the space program, he knew he needed to borrow a ton of money. But he found the provision that allowed the president to have the U.S. Treasury directly issue notes into circulation. Now, this is as opposed to us borrowing as a U.S. country from the Federal Reserve. So he decided to issue these U.S. notes. And if anybody has seen them, they were dated mostly 1963. They were $2, $5 notes mostly, some 10s, some 20s and hundreds, but very few, which are quite valuable, by the way. And they all had this red seal instead of the green seal that's typical on all the paper notes you have now. So if you pull any bill out of your pocket right now, just take a quick look at it. The little colored seal on the bill is green. And at the top it says Federal Reserve note. That indicates that the government borrowed that note from the Federal Reserve System the way we typically do. They print it. It costs them the cost of the paper and the ink. They then sell it to the U.S. Treasury. The Treasury borrows that capital from the Fed and pays interest on the money. If a U.S. note is issued, one of these red seals, directly from the Treasury, there's no borrowing involved. So we, the people, get to keep the seigniorage, which is what they call the cost difference between making something and its face value. So we could keep all of that money if we issued U.S. notes directly. But of course, after doing this, it kind of pissed off the Federal Reserve bankers. Subsequently, of course, Kennedy was assassinated. A lot of people have tied those things together. And, I understand that link. So it is an issue that has come up many, many times about whether or not politically it's even viable for a current president to say, well, what if we just do the same thing? What if we cut out the Federal Reserve and just issue notes directly from the U.S. Treasury? I don't think that's going to happen. What I think would be a better play would be for us to nationalize the Fed. Just take the entire Federal Reserve banking system and put it under the auspices of the United States Treasury. This way, at least Congress can respond to problems. And if we don't like how they're handling it, you can always throw a congressman out of office, but you can't throw a Federal Reserve board member off the board.
Yeah, Ron Paul tried that. You see how well that
him,
worked?
Right?
Yeah, see where it got him. So, the problem is that we have, we had the Credit River case with Jerome Daley. And in that case, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Fred. Most of us have heard about it. This is a Wisconsin. Yeah, this is a Wisconsin case where attorney Jerome Daley went into court and showed that the bank did not actually loan him money. They created credit out of thin air. The jury agreed. His whole mortgage was thrown out. He was eventually disbarred, and the judge, 6 months after he made the ruling and agreed with Jerome Daley, it's called the Credit River decision. 6 months later, the judge was poisoned.
No kidding.
So you see where that is an actual case out there. The Credit River decision, if you just type in Credit River Jerome Daley in your search engine, it will come up and you can read all about it because he got his house for free, but now he's not a practicing attorney anymore. And this was some time ago. But the thing is, there's all this stuff that people don't know about, which is why, when the Fed in Chicago put out Modern Money Mechanics and people chose not to read it, I'm just like,
I wish people would.
I wish they would too.
Read that. Yeah. Absolutely. So what we're talking about here is like what constitutes really a dollar, and was there a mortgage, and where did the money come from? And I could see the legal argument where you're saying that effectively I didn't borrow any money because there was no money involved. There was simply a credit issued and the bank created this debt out of thin air. And effectively, that's basically how the banking system operates when it comes to making mortgage loans. So I could understand how that legal argument held up. And I could also see the pushback, because imagine now if every American took that same argument down to their local county courthouse, we would have a nightmare going on. I think the way things are lining up right now, my expectations now are leaning towards a repeat of what we saw between 1977 and 1980. That's where I think we're heading. I'm looking at it. It's like Hangover 2. It's the revision of the same old story. So we've been through this before. The late 70s, between 77 and 80, inflation skyrocketed. We had hyperinflation. The price of gold went from 100 to 860 in less than 3 years, because the inflation rate had absolutely skyrocketed, because all of the pushback from going off the gold standard had forced all the money that was outside the U.S. to come pouring back into our shores. And this is the fundamental problem. 85% of all the paper money in the U.S. that has been printed by the U.S. government does not circulate domestically. It is outside our country's borders, being used around the world. And again, that's because we believe that there's support for the dollar. But if I'm right, and we're beginning to lose this support and de-dollarization is taking hold, the net result of this is that these dollars will come pouring back into the U.S. shores, and that will create massive inflation. And if you want to see what it'll look like, just revisit 1977 to 1980. Not only did the metal prices soar, but interest rates went skyrocket high. At that point in 79 and 80, a mortgage was 17, 18%. You could get 15% annual return on a CD in a bank. That's where rates were. And I think we're heading towards that same type of scenario, a revision of hyperinflation like we saw between those 3 years, 77 to 80, as this de-dollarization takes more and more hold around the world.
Well, and you might just brought up the fact that in Memphis, Tennessee, they're overpaying for houses to keep Chinese military-age men, I think is what is really going on. But, and the alternative, if you look at this from the economic side of things, what bothers me is that these guys are willing to bring all this money back in, like you're saying. All this stuff is pouring back in, and they're willing to pay more for a house than it's actually worth, because real estate in America isn't going anywhere. I mean, they actually have something physical that they can hold on to for whatever purpose. And so at the same time, they're dumping all that money back into the system. And what they're doing by overpaying for stuff is the bigger they hire, the harder they fall. I mean, can you see the reverse happening as far as that adding to the de-dollarization effort?
Well, think about it. If you were sitting on a ton of paper dollars that you believed in the next several years would lose 30, 40, 50% of their value, who cares if you're overpaying quote unquote, for the real estate. Because in the end, you're going to end up winning. Because the real estate value, like you said, is a physical, tangible thing. It'll perpetually get worth more and more money over the years. And those dollars that you're getting rid of as fast as you can are going to become worth much, much less. And I think this is a smart play by those foreign investors who are divesting themselves of U.S. dollars. If I were a central bank holding, billions and billions of U.S. dollars, I would be very hesitant right now. I'd be looking for a way to get the hell out of them. And if I'm not going to buy treasuries because I think interest rates are going to go higher, which means buying treasuries now will be worth less in the future, that doesn't work. What can I do with the money? Of course, I'm a big fan of gold and silver coins for that same fundamental reason. But if other investors are coming to the U.S., these Chinese investors, and again, you call it overpaying, and sure, absolutely, compared to current market levels, it would appear so. But 5 years from now, these guys are going to look like geniuses.
Well, they think. And see, the thing is, though, that the Jiangxi Bank just closed its doors and caused the major bank run in China. And it's no wonder they're dumping all that money back over here. I mean, the Chinese commercial markets are tanking, and it's headed this direction. They just had news out this week about all these hundreds or thousands of businesses now are filing for Chapter 11. The commercial shoe is dropping. What is that doing to the economy and our system where the dollar is as far as being propped up? I mean, there's going to come a point in time where we're getting back to the 77 to 80 period you were just talking about.
Yep, I could see it. Now, China's been facing a big problem. They overbuilt like crazy for quite a while. And of course, their economy turned downward, and now they can't get out of that overbuilding status. And of course, the commercial real estate market there is plummeting, and that's creating huge problems. Of course, we do need China because they support all of our sales and purchases of all the goods and services that we sell. And we are their biggest consumer, so they need us. We have this symbiotic relationship. But I do understand that the way the money flow is going, if you take a step backward and sort of look at how it seems to be evolving, it seems to me they understand something that the public here in America might be behind the curve to getting. And that is that they get it. They see that the value of that dollar is falling, and they're getting out as fast as they can. I would encourage Americans to take the same position. If you're sitting on dollars that you're not going to be using for the next 4 or 5 years, get out of those dollars and buy yourself whatever it is you love. Rare guitars, rare motorcycles, gold and silver coins, physical real estate. Do it now, because the dollar's weakness is going to kick in, and it's going to happen, and it's going to create a problem that you can't unwind it after the fact.
That's right.
You cannot unring a bell. And if I'm right, and we're going through a period of like 77 to 80 hyperinflation, let me tell you, it's going to devastate the wealth of a lot of people who are not prepared. So diversification is going to become critical. But follow the trend. Look at what other countries are doing, and why are they divesting themselves of dollars. I think de-dollarization is going to become a huge, huge problem.
Yeah, I think so too. Fred Dashevsky, thanks so much. We're out of time for today. USCoinCapital.com, 1-800-878-2646. Tell Fred we sent you. In the meantime, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. We'll see you tomorrow.